Thank you for joining us, whether you're watching on TV or online. I'm Farah Nasser. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to provide his daily COVID-19 update, but today is going to be a little different because the Prime Minister will be speaking from here, the second floor of the West Block at Parliament Hill. This is ahead of today's virtual sitting of the House. He's also going to be joined by the Minister of Defence, Harjit Sajjan. And as you see, there are other chairs there as well. Other defence officials will also be joining this as we get an update on the Canadian helicopter that has gone missing off the coast of Greece. Now, while we wait for that update, let's take a look at your latest COVID-19 numbers, where things stand both globally and here at home. This is the global picture. More than 3.2 million known infections worldwide. In Canada, we know that more than 52,000 people have tested positive. More than 3,000 people here have died from the disease. Let's take a quick look at the numbers across the country right now. Here is your map. Alberta now has more than 5,000 confirmed cases. Ontario has more than 16,000 cases after reporting more than 450 just moments ago. And Quebec still by far has the most cases with 26,000 known infections. I want to also point you to Nunavut, which is also reporting its very first case of the virus today. We have comprehensive coverage of the COVID-19 situation from right across the country. We have expert analysis from our chief political correspondent, David Akin. He joins us from his home in Ottawa. We also have Global's Travis Danraj, who joins us from Toronto, Ontario, which is one of the hardest hit provinces, Ontario. We are going to hear more about Ontario's response and Premier Doug Ford's reopening plan. And it's a very different story on the East Coast. Silas Brown, you see him there. He joins us from Fredericton, New Brunswick. That province, by the way, hasn't seen a new case of COVID-19 for 11 straight days. We'll get to our correspondents in a second, but I wanted to update you on two developing stories. We're going to begin in Alberta, where the people of Fort Mac are dealing with a natural disaster on top of the global pandemic and economic crisis that we are all dealing with. But there is some positive news to report out of Alberta. The ice jam that's caused the catastrophic damage to the town is now shrinking. About 13,000 people, though, in the region, they were forced to evacuate. Fort McMurray is already stretched thin from dealing with the pandemic. One person has died as a result of the flooding. And now an update from overseas. We're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister this morning on the Canadian Forces helicopter that crashed off the coast of Greece. Meantime, we now know that 23-year-old Abbigail Cowbrough has been identified by family as the first victim of the crash. 5 people are still missing after the chopper crashed off the coast of Greece. It was taking part in a NATO exercise when it went down. The Canadian Armed Forces has now not confirmed, how many people were on board, but say the crew's families have been contacted. Cowbrough was well known in Halifax's naval community. She was based out of the Shearwater Naval Base in Dartmouth. Let's bring in our David Akin with more on what to expect from the Prime Minister this morning. He's, of course, going to be addressing this. David.
Yeah, and that's really what the topic is about. We may get some questions about some of the COVID-19 measures from reporters, but he is there with his top general, Jonathan Vance, the chief of the defense staff, with his defense minister, Harjit Sajjan, to speak about the disappearance of this helicopter, a CH-148 Cyclone. These are relatively new pieces of equipment for the Royal Canadian Air Force. And this particular Cyclone was flying off of the HMCS Fredericton. The Fredericton is based out of Halifax, and she's a frigate, and she was in the Mediterranean as part of routine NATO exercises that have been going on for several years now. It's called Operation Reassurance, and Operation Reassurance is all about essentially showing the flag to any potential aggressors, to NATO allies in Central and Eastern Europe. So the Fredericton would have been over there. She would have been conducting sort of routine exercises in the region, and we understand this particular cyclone was on some exercises, and we're told with a complement of 6 people on board. I believe the Cyclone normally would have a crew of 4, but there may have been 2 additional people, and we understand they may all be Canadians. As you mentioned, the Canadian Forces have contacted the primary family members of each of the individuals who is right now listed as missing. At least one we know has perished. We know that from her dad. And we're going to find out more, I guess, from the Prime Minister and from the Defence Minister, sort of what happened, what were the conditions like that may have led to the crash. Again, the Cyclone, a relatively new piece of equipment, replaced the old aging Sea Kings based out of CFB Shearwater near Halifax.
Okay, so we will wait for information on that. But David, a couple other points to talk about. I'm not sure what the Prime Minister will be addressing specifically in terms of this, and that is the crisis with meatpacking plants. Talk to us about the pressure that Ottawa has right now to deal with that.
Well, in fact, last night, sort of over the dinner hour, the House of Commons Industry Committee met, and one of the witnesses was Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau. She is jointly in charge of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, jointly in charge with the Health Minister, Patty Hajdu. And we've had a whole bunch of different kinds of problems with meatpacking plants in the country. I mentioned the CFIA because one of the problems that cropped up about a month ago was not enough federal meat inspectors. And so the lines could not move quickly enough because there just weren't enough federal meat inspectors online. That's been one of the challenges that's been gumming things up. The bigger challenge right now is COVID-19 has hit the workforces at several key plants across the country, most notably the plant run by Cargill in High River, Alberta. This is where 40% of the country's beef is processed, and it's shut down right now, but it is set to open again on Monday. But there could be some controversy here because the union representing the workers at that Cargill plant in High River say the plant is not safe, they don't want to go back to work, and they may be suing to prevent Cargill from reopening the plant. So last night at the, as I say, the House of Commons Industry Committee, the Conservative MP from High River, his name is John Barlow, he was pressing Bibeau about what's going on. Earl Dreeshen, Conservative MP from Red Deer, Alberta, was part of that committee. He's looking for some sort of agriculture package to help bail out producers. You can see the issue here. If meatpacking plants aren't processing animals, back at the farm, cattle and hogs, because we have some hog plants also in trouble, cattle and hogs are still growing. They still need to be fed. And we're now in a situation where some of those producers are having to euthanize their animals at the farm. And that's the worst case scenario because they never enter the food chain. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for the federal government. As I say, Agriculture Minister Bibeau, she didn't have many answers yesterday other than to say she's in negotiations with producer groups, talking to the CFIA and trying to come up with some sort of solution.
Okay, David Akin, thank you. We're going to keep you on standby as we hear from the Prime Minister. I want to bring in Travis Danraj in Ontario now. You know, Travis, the big question, regardless of which province you live in, is when will restrictions be lifted? And we're hearing more about Ontario's framework for reopening.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the Premier, Doug Ford, here introduced a framework to reopen the economy earlier this week, but it had no dates, no specific timeline for doing that. 3 phases in which the Premier says the province will be reopened, but a lot of businesses criticize the Premier for saying that they aren't able to plan because they have no dates. Well, the Premier says that they need to get the numbers down. They need to get case numbers down in order to be able to move towards a situation where they have specific hard dates. Each of these phases will be about 2 to 4 weeks, and right now the case numbers in the Ontario area are about 450 to 500 additional cases a day. That's what we've been seeing for the past several weeks now. We saw a little bit of a dip yesterday, 342 new cases, but generally it's around the 400 range. Now, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams, says that he wants that number around 200 or so in order to be confident to advise the Premier that he can start reopening the economy. So that phase 1, it could be another several weeks here before we get to that point. And there are a lot of concerns about the fact that this could go into the fall, Farah.
Well, one of the big key pillars about opening the economy is testing. And Ontario, as you know, has come under fire for low testing numbers. The Premier, he had an initial target of 18,000 tests, and that was supposed to be by April 17th. Is that target being met?
Well, listen, we're hearing numbers 14,000, 13,000 thrown around. 3 weeks ago, the Premier said that he wanted to see 13,000 tests a day by the next day. That was 3 weeks ago. Right now, we're averaging about 12,500 or so. We know that testing is a huge issue, and they want to get those testing numbers up. Now, they have seen some gains when it comes to that, but still, there are a lot of concerns from home care workers and different workers and personal support workers in different areas, saying that, getting these test results back still is taking a very long time. So they need to ramp up lab capacity as well. And once we see the test numbers ramp up, we could also see case numbers ramp up as well. I just want to highlight the fact that a 51-year-old personal support worker, a home care worker, Arlene Reed, passed away. And she was working in a home care setting in the Peel region. She was 51 years old, a mother of 5. She had 3 grandchildren, and we haven't heard a lot from the government on home care workers. These are workers that go from home to home, and a lot of these workers are saying that they have concerns about testing. They want to be tested. Long-term care workers are being tested, but home care workers are not. They also have concerns about personal protection equipment, Farah.
Yeah, it's very, very tragic to hear about that home care worker in Peel region, which is outside of Toronto. Travis, Ontario is surrounded by two provinces, or two provinces on either border. One is going to be reopening schools soon. The other one has a reopening plan that's coming very soon with other industries as well. What is Ontario's plan in terms of schools specifically and other businesses right now?
Right. Well, Premier Ford was asked about Francois Legault's decision to reopen schools, some schools and daycares, on the 11th of May, which is less than 2 weeks away. And there are a lot of concerns about folks from Quebec coming into Ontario. And if we see a surge, what could happen? Well, the Premier says at this point, he's not looking at border restrictions, but certainly it is a major concern that the government says that they are going to be looking at. Schools in this province will not be open until at least the end of the month. Farah?
Okay, Travis, thanks for that. Now, there is some possible good news about a COVID-19 treatment. The New York Times is reporting that the FDA is set to announce the Ebola drug remdesivir is being given emergency use authorization. Now, this is a study from the U.S. National Institute. It shows that patients taking the drug took an average of 11 days to recover from the virus compared to 15 days for other patients. Of course, we're watching that. The world is watching that very closely. The Premier of Manitoba, has laid out a plan to reopen that province. Now, this first phase begins next week, as I mentioned with Travis. As of May 4th, some businesses are going to open at half occupancy. They're going to have to follow strict physical distancing and cleaning practices. More recreational spaces like parks and museums, they'll also open, and restaurant patios will also be allowed to open. The second phase will begin no later than June 1st, and at that time, the limit on public gatherings may be increased along with dine-in restaurants. In New Brunswick, as we mentioned, no new cases have been reported for 11 days straight. That province is already in phase 1 of their reopening plan. So to find out how it's going, joining me from Fredericton is Silas Brown. Silas, talk to us about what phase 1 looks like and how it's going.
So phase 1 is really focused on outdoor activities. They really want people to get outside and to take advantage of one of the things that we have in New Brunswick in abundance, which is outdoor spaces. Businesses aren't really included in this first round. We could see them coming in over the next couple phases, which could start to happen in anywhere 2 to 4 weeks, they're saying, as we start to see the curve continue to flatten. But one of the very interesting things that's been included in this first round is this idea of 2 family bubbles, which effectively allows 2 households to enter into a kind of exclusive agreement and arrangement to add one another to their family unit, and therefore not have to socially distance when they are with each other. Now, you can only do that with one other family, which has led to some tough decisions, obviously. The Premier Blaine Higgs said the other day, it's unfortunate, but not every grandparent is going to be able to see their grandchildren. But the concept has been borrowed from New Zealand, who introduced it. And our Chief Medical Officer of Health says that the idea is to try and decrease social isolation while also limiting contacts. Obviously, if you only have 2 households seeing one another, you're not, the potential to spread the virus is kept within that bubble for the most part, but you're still able to see other people and socialize, which is something that is fairly important at this point, where a lot of us are spending a lot of time inside and alone.
Now, Premier Blaine Higgs he also suggested the province may let municipalities run a deficit right now.
Yeah, so this is something that came up yesterday, and I know British Columbia has already moved to allow that to happen. Obviously, Canadian municipalities by law cannot run deficits, but municipalities are being hit extremely hard with revenue shortfalls by the pandemic. In New Brunswick, the Union of Municipalities here has estimated that by July 31st, municipalities across the province could lose about $10.5 million. So that doesn't sound like a massive number, but we're talking about a province of about 700,000 people here. It's a pretty big dent to a lot of municipalities here. And the solution could be something like allowing them to run deficits. Now, the union has said that that's only a very short-term solution. A lot of these municipalities are just going to have to kick the can down the road, as it were, with deficits. And these revenues are not coming back. These are lost revenues and not things that are really going to be recouped. And it's pretty unclear at this point how revenues are going to rebound as the province starts reopening. We don't know how revenues will come back or to what extent they will. And particularly the thing that could hit them very hard is Premier Blaine Higgs has said that we likely won't have mass gatherings in the province until next year, until December 31st. So we are in a position here where those sorts of events where people congregate and come together aren't going to be able to happen. Okay,
thank you for that. Thanks, Silas. Now, going from that to personal finance, I'm going to bring in David Aiken. And David, let's talk about seniors, because I know, that was asked about several times at press conferences. The Prime Minister said in March that there was going to be help for students and seniors. We've heard about the students aspect. And now the Conservatives are really pushing for help for seniors. What are they asking for specifically?
Right, so a couple of new ideas floated by the Conservative National Revenue critic Marty Morancy's from Winnipeg and their finance critic Pierre Poilievre, who is actually the MP for the riding I'm standing in right now. And here's what they'd like to do. They have two measures. First of all, they would like to allow Canadians who are in trouble right now, they could be seniors, they could be people sort of in a little older, to make a one-time withdrawal from your RRSP without making tax. And of course, the rules normally are if you take money out of your RRSP, you are taxed by your bank. They usually withhold, 20-30%, and because it's taxable income. So the Conservatives are saying, hey, let people take out a chunk from their RRSP. It's a one-time only, under the condition they repay it by December 2023. So if you were going to take that money out because you needed to pay some bills or you'd lost some income, you would have until 2023 to put it back in the RSP without paying tax. So that's one idea. The second one really is geared more for seniors, and that's for, you may know the rules on registered income funds, a RIF. Seniors are required to make monthly withdrawals from their RIFs. But of course, with the stock market gyrations that we've seen, the value of some stocks in people's income funds that they depend on is low. And so the Conservatives saying, wait a minute, you only lose money really when you sell something inside your RIF. And if you're cashing it out, you're selling something, selling part of your holdings. So let's defer mandatory withdrawals from a RIF for a few months. So that's another proposal being put forward by the Conservatives. I've heard from lots of seniors, you may well have as well, Farah, that seniors are saying, can we have a one-time boost in the OAS, the Old Age Security Benefit? That has come up. The Prime Minister hasn't really addressed specific help targeted at seniors only. And seniors are writing to say, look at that, there's some help for students, help for those who are employed, there's a wage subsidy for business, and there are some seniors who are having it more difficult, mostly because their costs have increased. It's more difficult to get out and get medicine from a pharmacy. You have to have it delivered. That costs money. More difficult to get food. That has to be delivered, and that costs a fee. So these are some of the things that seniors have been writing. If they're writing to me, I'm sure they're writing to their MP as well, and to the government.
I forget, during the election, there were promises for seniors as well. So there were promises to help in different areas for seniors. So that's already kind of been there in the plan. I wanted to ask you, though, about businesses, because we now have some numbers from Stats Can. How much are Canadian businesses suffering right now?
Yeah, it's we knew it was grim. I mean, there's no question about it. And yesterday, StatsCan released some data from a survey it did in a couple of weeks ago. 16,000 businesses of all kinds, nonprofit, government agencies, and for-profit businesses, and half of all businesses surveyed said they had seen a drop in revenue in the first quarter of this year versus last quarter of at least 20%. Half had seen a drop in revenue of at least 20%. Now, 1/3 of businesses reported a drop in revenue of 40% or more. And so you can see where we're going here. And what have businesses done? Well, of course, they have laid people off. 2/3 of businesses saying they've had to lay off at least one employee. And in some sectors, it's really remarkable. We know that the accommodation and food services sector, that's restaurant and hotels, we know how badly it's been hit, and we got some numbers on that. 1 in 4 restaurants or hotels has laid off 100% of their employees. That's the accommodation and food services business. And then we see a sector that has been perhaps least affected, although affected, and that is the agriculture and fisheries sector, where just 14% of firms in that sector have been forced to lay people off. So this is an important data set from StatsCan because they're going to track this again in a couple of months, and we'll be able to see which businesses are recovering a little quicker, which may need more help. Of some note, I think something around 65, 70% of businesses saying, you get rid of these social distancing rules and we're back up to speed, regular operations within a month. So that's encouraging to know. Of course, we're not going to be eliminating all social distancing rules for quite some time, but businesses are trying to hold on. And of course, this is the week that they've been able to apply for a wage subsidy to help put employees back on their payroll, and they'll start to receive some of the dollars from that wage subsidy program in their bank accounts next week.
And David, worth noting, it's May 1st tomorrow, so that means that rent is going to be due as well. And I know there's been commercial rent relief that the government's announced. What about residential rent relief? I know the Prime Minister had said previously that it's kind of up to provinces to help out. Do we know if there's anything to help people out tomorrow as they have to pay for their rent?
Well, I guess this is really, on the residential side, a tenant talking to a landlord, and there are some provincial laws that govern that relationship. And I think the federal government would say that's the point of a wage subsidy program. That's the point of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, is to provide that temporary relief. The big problem, I think, right now, or the emerging big problem, is really on the commercial side, is on the rent relief programs there. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has been complaining that the rent relief program that was outlined by the government, which has the goal of essentially providing rent relief for April, May, June, and July to business customers, it needs landlords to buy in, and landlords really have to be the ones to get the subsidy that they can then credit against their tenants. And right now, what the CFIB is hearing, this is the business group, is that landlords just don't want to buy in the program. They're telling their commercial tenants, maybe for June or July I'll try that, but you're going to have to pay me your rent for April, it's overdue, and you're going to have to pay me rent in May. So this may be yet another program the government has rolled out only to fine-tune it or change it after the fact. And the government, to its credit, has been ready to make some changes where it thinks, where it hears from various groups that changes ought to be made. This may be one of those, the commercial rent relief program. Not much help for those who have to write a rent check tomorrow. But again, this may be something the Prime Minister might be asked about when he speaks to reporters, any minute now.
Right. Yeah, we're taking a look right now at West Block, at that room that's now being converted into a press theater. We've heard from a minister speaking from that room as well after the Prime Minister speaks, usually at 11:15. We're just waiting for that to happen. But David, while I have you, I might as well ask you, how did yesterday go with the House passing the student aid package and the opposition changes? Were those changes met?
Yeah, and so, one of the debates we've had politically over the last couple of weeks is, the House of Commons does important work because it's a minority government and other parties can improve things the government does. And so yesterday, the government did table some legislation to help with students, a $9 billion package of a variety of grants, loans, etc. for students. And sure enough, both the Conservatives were able to get the bill changed to the way the Conservatives wanted to see some changes, and that was to provide more incentives to get students doing, even if it's volunteer work, get them out getting some work experience. And the New Democrats wanted to make the grants available to students as rich as the Canada Emergency Response Fund. In other words, more money for students. They were able to do that. And so yesterday, after an afternoon of debate, this bill was passed into law. And again, Farah, you and I ran through it just to remind people from their high school civics lessons, any legislation needs 3 readings in the House of Commons. That normally takes a period of weeks, sometimes months. They did it in about 2 hours yesterday. They got unanimous agreement from all parties to do that. Now it will go to the Senate. The Senate will sit tomorrow, Friday, and the Senate will do the same thing. Modify the operating rules so 3 readings can happen in the Senate, 1, 2, 3 in about an hour and a half, and then the Governor General will sign it into law, and that will let the funding flow. Now, you mentioned the House is going to sit this afternoon. Yes, there's MPs who are essentially participating in a virtual session, but it's not the House of Commons technically. It's what's called the Special Committee on COVID-19. It's a committee made up of all MPs. It's a giant Zoom or Skype for Business sort of virtual gathering where you've got all 338 MPs in those little squares and the speaker's trying to corral them all. So far, so good. They did one of these on Tuesday. It seemed to work out. There were a few hiccups, a few snags here and there. It's interesting to see the backgrounds that MPs decide to use as they come into this virtual House of Commons. But that's what's going to occur this afternoon. It's a chance for MPs, opposition MPs, to continue to question ministers, to hold them to account. That's the role of the opposition, is an accountability function, and that's what the virtual parliament's all about.
The speaker has control of the mute button, which of course is also very important. Let me ask you quickly, because I think we have a 1-minute warning, but the Prime Minister after this afternoon, late this afternoon, is going to be speaking to premiers and territorial leaders. Do we know what they're going to be talking about?
Right, well, that's a good point. This has become about a weekly call now between the Prime Minister and all the premiers, make sure they're coordinating their activities, talking about the guidelines for any reopening scenarios, and I suspect that will be top of the agenda at this point in time. They may come back to this rent program because, as I mentioned, rent is a provincial responsibility, and if there is going to be some fine-tuning to the rent relief program for businesses, it's going to take the provinces to be on board. The provinces may have some thoughts about this, so I expect that will be one of the things that they will want to address, and we'll want to just make sure that people are opening or doing reopenings at roughly the same time. One of the big stories this week, Farah, I know you've reported on it, is Ontario's reopening plan, no date on it, is quite different from Quebec's reopening plan, which is going to start really next week. And of course, I'm right on the border with the province of Quebec. There are still checkpoints if you want to travel from Ottawa into Gatineau and Hull on the Quebec side. You've got to go through police checkpoints. Right. You don't want any unnecessary visitors.
They're certainly connected.
How is that all going to work out?
Okay, thanks, David. Here's the Prime Minister now.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Yesterday, a Royal Canadian Navy helicopter on a NATO mission, carrying 6 members of the Canadian Armed Forces, went down with all hands in the Ionian Sea off the coast of Greece. They were flying from the Canadian naval frigate HMCS Fredericton, home port of Halifax, as part of Operation Reassurance. 1 casualty was recovered and 5 are missing. All of them are heroes. Each of them will leave a void that cannot be filled. On behalf of all Canadians, I want to offer my deepest support to their families, their friends, their shipmates, and their fellow CAF members. This is another very hard day for Halifax, for Nova Scotia, and for our armed forces families. I spoke to NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg earlier this morning, who offers support and assistance in the times to come. In the coming days, there will be many questions about how this tragedy occurred, and I can assure you we will get answers in due course. Hier, un hélicoptère de la Marine royale canadienne, engagé dans une mission de l'OTAN et transportant 6 membres des forces armées canadiennes, s'est écrasé dans la mer Ionienne, au large des côtes de la Grèce. L'hélicoptère était déployé à bord de la frégate HMCS Fredericton dans le cadre de...
It was part of the HMCS Operation Reassurance mission, and There was one casualty recovered and 5 people missing. They are all heroes. On behalf of all Canadians, I would like to offer my support to the family and friends and to the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, to the people of Halifax and to the people of Nova Scotia. We are with you.
Of grief, a time of hardship, heartbreak, and loss for so many Canadians. The men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces stand tall. Bearing the maple leaf on their shoulders, they are known around the world as beacons of civility, compassion, and courage. Whether combating terrorism, standing by our partners and allies, or supporting peace operations around the world, they do what they always do: step towards danger so the rest of us can stay safe. Operation Reassurance is Canada at its best, bolstering security and stability in Central and Eastern Europe. Here at home, we turn to the forces in times of flood, fire, or other natural disasters. They never say no. They always put their shoulders to the wheel. And now, as we battle the COVID-19 pandemic, the Canadian Armed Forces are on the front lines in our seniors' homes, helping to protect and care for our most vulnerable citizens. Even as up to 915 soldiers are deployed on Operation Reassurance in Europe, reinforcing NATO's collective defence, the CAF will soon have more than 500 serving in 13 long-term care facilities in and around Montreal. And more will go in as they are prepared for this work. Earlier this week, CAF teams were deployed to assist in 5 long-term care facilities in Ontario. These people are working day and night, helping to protect our parents, our uncles, our aunts, and our grandparents. En cette saison,
At this time of grief, the women and the men of the Canadian Armed Forces keep their heads high, proudly bearing the maple leaf. They're recognized worldwide as models of civility, compassion, and courage. Whether they're called to combat terrorism, to stand alongside our partners and allies, or during peace operations, they do what they're used to doing. They step towards danger to ensure our security. We turn to them in Canada when there's a flood, a forest fire, or another natural disaster. They never say no. They're always ready. And now, as we're facing a pandemic, the Canadian Armed Forces are once again here for us. They're taking care of our seniors. They're helping out at seniors' homes. 915 soldiers are currently participating in Operation Reassurance, and soon there'll be more than 500 members of the Canadian Armed Forces in long-term care homes in Montreal, and others will join them soon. Earlier this week, members of the CAF were deployed in 5 long-term care facilities in Ontario. Our members work day and night to protect our parents, our aunts and uncles and grandparents. They deserve our recognition.
or abroad, the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces are the hand of our intentions, the concrete expression of our valor and values as Canadians. And so we stand with them, and we hold out hope to find the missing. Once again, thank you for joining us. I will now turn it over to Minister Sajjan, General Vance, and Deputy Minister Thomas.
Thank you, Prime Minister. As the Prime Minister has said, yesterday we lost contact with a CH-148 Cyclone helicopter deployed on board HMCS Fredericton. The helicopter was involved in an accident while it was participating in NATO allied exercises as part of Operation Reassurance off the coast of Greece in the Ionian Sea. Since yesterday, I've had a number of conversations with the Secretary General of NATO. We remain in contact with Italy, Greece, the United States, and Turkey, who are assisting us in the search and rescue efforts to help us find the Canadian Armed Forces members who are on the helicopter. Through the night and day, ships, aircraft, and helicopters were engaged in search and rescue efforts. I want to thank all our allies for their support on this. As of this morning, this is what we currently know. The cause of this accident is unknown at this time. We can confirm the death of one member of the Royal Canadian Navy. Search efforts are still ongoing for the remaining 5 missing members. We have recovered the flight data and voice recorders from the helicopter. A Canadian Armed Forces flight safety team is departing today to begin their work to find answers for the families and loved ones. And the families and members on the helicopter have been notified. The families of the members of on the helicopter have been contacted by the Canadian Armed Forces. The Chief of Defence Staff is making sure that families are kept up to date with information on their loved ones. We will continue to provide all support to the families who are affected by this. As we receive new information, the Canadian Armed Forces, the Department of National Defence, and I will continue to update Canadians as soon as it is appropriate to do so. I've also spoken with my parliamentary colleagues from the Conservative, Bloc Québécois, and the NDP to provide information on the situation, and I will be updating them later today. Our government, the Canadian Armed Forces, the Department of National Defence, and all of Canada are with the families and loved ones of the Canadian Armed Forces members who were on that helicopter. Canadian Armed Forces members come from across Canada to serve their country. But I know that for the community in Halifax and Shearwater, Nova Scotia, where HMCS Fredericton and where the crew of this Cyclone helicopter is based, this incident impacts them in a profound way. All of our Canadian Armed Forces members serve our country with dignity and courage. I want to recognize our women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces for the work they do on international operations to support peace and security around the world, and their efforts here at home during these challenging times in support of our efforts to stop and slow the spread of COVID-19. This selfless service by the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces is what our military is known for. And I want to thank them for all the work they do to keep Canadians safe. And we will be there for the families, the friends, and loved ones during this difficult time. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to General Vance.
Thanks, Minister. Prime Minister, good morning. Bonjour.
Good morning.
Fredericton and its CH-148 Cyclone helicopter were deployed on Operation Reassurance in support of NATO assurance and deterrence measures. Approximately 240 members left Canada in January 2020. They had just marked their 100th day on operations and were due to return to Canada in July. L'NCSM Fredericton et son hélicoptère CH.
The HMCS Fredericton was deployed as part of a reassurance mission to do assurance for NATO. There were 240 members who left Canada in January, and they had just spent their 100th day participating in the operation, and they were expected to come back to the country in July.
I tell you that the body of Sub-Lieutenant Abbigail Cowbrough, Marine Systems Engineering Officer, has been recovered, and 5 crew members remain missing.
It is with deep sorrow that I announce that the body of Sub-Lieutenant Abbigail Cowbrough was found, and 5 members of the team are still missing.
The missing at this point out of sensitivity for family. To their family and friends, to the family and friends and shipmates of Sub-Lieutenant Cowbrough, our thoughts and prayers are with you during this difficult time. To those of you in agony, awaiting the word on the fate of their missing loved ones, we stand with you and are searching as hard as we can. There are no words to describe the pain that you feel right now, nor are there any words that can ease it. Please know that the entire Canadian Armed Forces, and clearly the country, is with you. J'offre à la famille de...
To the family of Sub-Lieutenant Cowbrough and her friends, her colleagues, I offer my sincere condolences. I can't imagine the pain you're experiencing right now, and there are no words that can relieve this. However, know that all of the Canadian Armed Forces and Canada are behind you.
4:35 p.m. Eastern European Time, the helicopter air detachment, call sign Stalker, took off from HMCS Fredericton during a NATO exercise off the coast of Greece. HMCS Fredericton was working alongside an Italian and Turkish ship under standing NATO Maritime Group 2 and was conducting basic intership training serials. The Cyclone helicopter had conducted flight operations and was returning to the ship. At approximately 6:52 p.m., the ship lost contact with the air crew, and a few minutes later, flares were spotted in the water. At 16h35,
At 6:52, the call sign Stalker was participating in a NATO operation, and the HMCS Fredericton was beside an Italian and Turkish vessel and was conducting basic training serials. The Cyclone helicopter was doing air missions and was returning back to the vessel. Around 6:52 p.m., the ship lost contact with the helicopter crew, and a few minutes later, flares were seen in the water.
Efforts were immediately launched with every available resource from Fredericton and members of SNMG2. We are grateful to our allies, especially NATO allies, Italy and Turkey and the United States, for their assistance and their support and their continued support during this difficult time. Des opérations de recherche.
Operations for search and rescue were immediately launched with all available resources, and also those of the permanent second NATO mission. We are grateful to our allies, notably those of NATO, Italy, Turkey, and the United States, for their help and support during this difficult time.
Voice recorder and flight data recorder have been recovered. An aircraft is being dispatched to collect those recorders and bring them to the National Research Council for analysis. A flight safety investigation has been initiated, and a flight safety accident investigation team, similar to what the Transportation Safety Board would dispatch, will depart Canada today or tomorrow to investigate the circumstances surrounding this terrible accident. On date de ce matin,
as of this morning, the flight data and voice recorders were recovered. A flight is being sent to recover these recordings and to bring them to the National Research Centre in Canada for analysis. An investigation for flight security was launched, and a safety investigation team, similar to the one that the Transportation Safety Board would dispatch, will be leaving Canada today or perhaps tomorrow to investigate the circumstances around this terrible accident.
HMCS Fredericton and our allies continue to search the area. A support team is en route to help with logistics and support. Pour l'instant,
for the time being, HMCS Fredericton continues its search for the missing members. A support team is en route to help our personnel with logistics and support.
Agony for all families, friends, and fellow crew members. There is nothing worse than sending your shipmates over the horizon and losing contact. We have contacted all next of kin. We will provide them with all of the support and resources we can to help through this difficult time. Je reconnais.
I recognize that this is an time of agony for family and fellow crew members. There's nothing worse than to lose contact with a crew member. We contacted all next of kin of the victims and we will provide them with all the possible support and resources to help them get through this difficult time.
Of our brave sailors and aviators deployed on Operation Reassurance and the work that Canada's military personnel do every day for global security and to help their fellow Canadians at home. Je suis fier, tellement.
I am so proud of our brave sailors and aviators that are deployed as part of this Operation Reassurance, and they work every day to ensure global safety and to help Canadians.
My thoughts, all of our thoughts, are with all of you. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you, General Vance. Prime Minister, Minister, as a naval veteran, the daughter of a naval officer, and the wife of a naval officer, this tragedy hits home, for me, especially hard, as I know it does for so many members of our wider defence team. We know that all Canadians extend their deepest sympathies to the entire crew of HMCS Fredericton, who served shoulder to shoulder with their lost shipmate. As Deputy Minister of National Defence, I and the entire Defence team stand ready to support the Minister of Defence, the Chief of Defence Staff, and all of those impacted by this truly difficult time. Thank you for being here, and we will now take your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. We'll go to the phones first. One question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Bill Curry, the Globe and Mail, line open.
Yes, I think a question for General Vance. What can you tell us about Sub-Lieutenant Cowbrough, why she was on that helicopter, since we understand she's not a normal member of that crew?
Right. Thanks, Bill. All of the details surrounding why she and one other were on the aircraft will be released as we get through the investigation. It'd be premature for me right now to describe anything beyond the facts we have right now and that I've given you. Suffice to say, she was authorized to be on the helicopter, and further details about her, her family, and anything pertaining to her will be released formally later when we can confirm all of the details. Thank you.
And then for the Prime Minister, if you don't mind, a question on another topic. The Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report this morning saying that the federal deficit could reach $252 billion and that it could climb higher if the current programs are extended or if the government approves fiscal stimulus measures when the economy recovers. So at what point do you reach the limit of what Ottawa can afford in response to COVID-19, and how will your government deal with the new debt once this crisis is over?
Right now, we are focused on supporting families through this crisis. We need Canadians to stay home. We need Canadians to take the measures that will protect themselves, their loved ones, their neighbours, and our healthcare systems. And that's why we have made sure that we're sending help to the millions of Canadians across the country who need that help, whether it's through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy or other measures. We will continue to support Canadians to get through this in the best possible way so that our economy can come roaring back afterwards. Our focus is on what we need to do now to get through this. I have tremendous confidence in Canadians' ability to keep going and to come back stronger than ever afterwards. Okay.
Our priority in the current situation is to help the families and to support Canadians who need this so that we can do what we need to do, namely to stay at home, to be there for each other, to prevent COVID-19 from taking too many lives and from overly impacting our health system. We are going to continue to be there for Canadians, and Canadians will continue to be there for each other, for their neighbours, for our workers on the front lines of the healthcare system, and I'm very confident in our capacity to bounce back afterwards because of the decisions and the actions we're taking now as Canadians. Inaudible. We don't have details right now about the various members that were on the helicopter, including Abbigail, Cowbrough. We will have more details after we conduct our investigation, and we will give you precise details then. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Bastel.
Marie Bastel from Le Devoir. Question. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. To follow up on the question about that Bill asked about the PBO's report this morning, we've seen now that the debt to GDP ratio is now 49%, and I realize you're insisting what we have to do, we need to do to help Canadians, but people are starting to wonder, are you planning what will happen next to get a grip on our finances? Are you thinking about a specific tax or a way to pay back this money once this crisis is over? Answer. First, we're remaining focused on this crisis right now. We recognize that, yes, we have to help Canadians, but we also have to invest to ensure that an economic recovery will be possible as quickly as possible. That is why we've made the necessary investment to help families. Yes, we recognize that this is an economic crisis that will be tough, that is tough right now for many people, and it will last for a certain period. But at every stage, we have to ensure that the economic recovery will be possible. That's why we've kept people with ties to their employers through the wage subsidy. We've provided support for people so that they continue to pay their rent. We've provided assistance for companies so that they can keep cash reserves and pay their employees and keep their employers and ensure our economic health. This is the best way that we'll be able to get out of this crisis in good shape and to be able to ensure that the economic recovery is as strong as possible. Follow-up question? I understand, but with all due respect, it doesn't really answer my question about what will happen next. How do you expect to gain a grip on the economy? Do you have any measures in mind with respect to austerity, taxes, or are you expecting to run up deficits of hundreds of billions? Answer, of course, we're going to have to think about this, but for the time being, we are focused on what we have to do now to help Canadians to get through this crisis. We're lucky to have had one of the best debt to GDP ratios in the G7. There are many economies throughout the world that we compare ourselves to, and we are in a good budgetary position to be able to make the necessary investments to help people now, but also to be able to rebound afterwards. Canadians are extraordinary people, and our institutions are strong, our economy is strong and during normal times, but we'll also be able to show great health. We'll be discussing measures in due time that we'll have to take, depending on how this pandemic unfolds.
Our focus right now needs to be on how we get through right now to support Canadians, to support workers who've lost their paychecks, to support families who need to take measures to protect themselves and to protect our healthcare system. At the same time, our investments have also been focused on making sure that when we are able to get the economy back up and running, it will be done quickly and strongly. That's why investments like the emergency wage subsidy or the Canada Emergency Business Account are there to ensure that businesses, that our economy are able to hold through this difficult time and come roaring back afterwards. Canadians are a strong and resilient people, and our economy was in great shape before going into this. We had one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios of most of our comparable countries, and that left us in a great situation to be able to make the necessary investments to see us through this the right way. There will be time after this is all done, as we figure out how exactly this unfolds, where we will have to make next decisions on how that recovery looks. But right now, our focus is on getting through this together as a country.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Andrea Dunn, the Chronicle Herald. Line open.
Hi there. I'm wondering, I don't know who the best person to answer this question, perhaps Vance, but I'm wondering if there's been any consideration of grounding the rest of the Cyclone fleet because of this. Are they, what's the plan for that?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. We have put the fleet across Canada and overseas clearly in an operational pause. It's not a grounding, it's an operational pause. Until the commander of the RCAF and his flight safety team can determine the next steps. We will try to get back to business with those helicopters as quickly as we can, but we have to rule out that there's a fleet-wide problem, and we're going to do that as quickly as we can.
Just a follow-up question. I'm wondering, you mentioned that there was some flares spotted, but was there any sort of Mayday call or anything issue? Could you provide any information about that?
Right. Honestly, I have to wait, as do we all, for any details that come from the flight recorders, voice and data flight recorders. Anything we have right now has been passed in the heat of the moment. I can tell you what is known, and I have. As far as any further details, they will have to come as a result of an investigation.
Details, all details will be coming with respect to this helicopter after the investigation is conducted. I forget your other question. Yes. All the helicopters that are CH-148 are on an operational pause. This will allow the flight safety team to determine if there was an issue with these helicopters. We're going to continue operations as quickly as possible. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question.
Next question. Émilie Bergeron, Agence QMI. Question. Good morning. My first question is for General Vance. Can you specify what operational pause means in terms of grounding these helicopters? Answer, I think I understood your question. An operational pause is established by the Canadian Armed Forces for two reasons mainly. One, to allow the members of this community to have a moment to think about their crew member. It's important. This is a rather small community and close community. They lost a member of their community, and it's hard for them. Second, we have to eliminate or rule out any problems. So it is a pause that is temporary to allow the Canadian Armed Forces to look at this quickly.
Merci.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Trudeau on another topic. Yesterday at the House, you weren't exactly clear about your intentions in terms of companies that benefit from tax havens. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to clarify this. Will these companies be able to get the wage subsidy or not? Answer. We've always fought against tax evasion and avoidance. We've invested in unprecedented measures with the CRA to ensure that there are consequences for any company that seeks to not pay its fair share of taxes. We are going to continue to apply consequences during this crisis and this pandemic. Our priority is always Canadian workers who need support this time, and that's what we're going to do.
Charles, Toronto Star. General Vance, condolences on the loss of your members. Could you give us any more details? Though I understand you said that recorders were recovered, so have you recovered the wreckage of the chopper as well? And I just wonder, if not, what is the challenge presenting you in those waters?
Right. Hi, Tonda. Thank you for the condolences. The recorders broke away from the helicopter on the crash and floated, and they had a beacon that's automatically set off, and the ship and the ship's crew were able to find that the beacon and therefore recovered it. As far as we know, they're in about 3,000 meters of water in the Ionian Sea. And so the search continues, and until the search is done, we won't really know the disposition of any wreckage. But suffice to say that the Standing Naval Group is doing their best to conduct the search. There's a fairly sizable debris field, and they need to search through that debris field. And I don't know what other capabilities will be brought to bear over time. I have to leave that to the investigation.
I understand you say an operational pause, not a grounding. So what are your concerns, though, around this helicopter, which is supposed to be state-of-the-art?
Well, honestly, Tonda, I don't have any concerns about the helicopter. It's performed terrifically. It's got 9,000 hours on the fleet. We've had one other incident, which was a hard landing a little while ago, but that was because of a very unusual gust of wind that knocked the helicopter around. These are, as you know, superbly trained crews, pilots, electronic systems operators, and so on. It's a powerful helicopter with fantastic sensing capability, and it's about to go through a second block of upgrades to integrate that sensing capability. It's a sub-hunter, and it's good at it, way better capability than we had with the Sea Kings, and so I don't have any lack of confidence in the fleet. This is an accident we don't know until we know. We won't be able to make any judgments on the airworthiness of the helicopter. The commander of the RCF is as for this operational pause. He's the airworthiness authority for the Canadian Armed Forces. It's his decision to do that for the two reasons I described. One, sympathy to the teams who fly, it's a small community, and the other is to rule out anything immediate that they would have to take care of to be able to resume flying operations. Quelle question? Okay, nous avons.
I have a lot of confidence in this fleet of helicopters. They are state-of-the-art. These are new helicopters with a capacity for finding submarines, and the electronics on board are top class worldwide. So we have a lot of confidence in this fleet. And this operational pause was implemented by the Air Force commander to ensure that there's no obvious issue to ground the fleet. Hello, Raymond Fillon, TVA. Prime Minister, I'd like to go back to the PBO's report. You said earlier that you remain focused on the crisis and you'll think about what happens next later. But in terms of increasing taxes, is it something you've ruled out or is it a possibility? Answer: we're not thinking about that at all right now. We have great trust in the economic recovery and in the ability of Canadians to resume economic activity and to prosper. We've seen this for many years. Our economy's fundamentals remain very strong despite this crisis, and all countries are facing great difficulties economically, and Canada started this crisis with a better debt-to-GDP ratio than many of our partners, and we are going to be able to get out of this crisis, I hope, in a better position than other countries. And we shouldn't have to take any exceptional measures. We're here to work together on an economic recovery, and I have great trust in the capacity of our Canadians and in our economic recovery. Thank you. Hello, Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. General Vance, can you be more specific about the nature of the mission? Was it a surveillance mission for enemy forces? Was there any contact? I'll allow you to take notes. Was there a contact after the end of the operation when the troops returned to HMCS Fredericton? Were the flares automatic or were they manually engaged? Did the crew send a distress signal? Answer: it's rather technical, and I'll answer in English if that's all right. I understand your question.
Operation Reassurance is an assurance and deterrence measure, meaning that the alliance has put on the ground and at sea capabilities to tell Russia and any adversaries to not interfere with European security, North Atlantic security. And it's also to assure allies that we are all in this together. And Canada has been present, particularly at the maritime mission, without fail. At the time of the accident, the Standing Maritime Group was conducting training and not conducting surveillance or particularly targeted operations on any particular vessel, adversary or otherwise. There was no, from what I can tell, we can't rule anything out, but I'm quite certain from a military situation, this was not a function of contact or a shoot down. I want to make that abundantly clear. And I just lost the thread on your last.
Or the manual or the automatic?
As I understand it, from what I was briefed, that the flares would go automatically when it ditched. That will be determined more fully by the flight safety investigation. Merci.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, can I, Tom Perry with CBC, can I ask you about another matter? We've seen a list of assault-style weapons that your government is considering banning. Can I ask why this list, why not other weapons, and the timing? Why are you doing this now? Is it because of the Nova Scotia shooting?
We have long been committed to strengthening gun control in this country, including banning military-style assault weapons. There is no need in Canada for guns designed to kill the largest amount of people in the shortest amount of time. That was a commitment we made in the last election, and it's something on which there is a large consensus by Canadians who want to see less violence and fewer deaths from gun violence in this country. We were almost ready to go on measures to do just that when Parliament suspended because of COVID-19. And we will have more to say on this when we make an announcement around what we're doing to strengthen gun control in the coming days.
We have made a firm commitment to Canadians to ban military assault-style weapons because in Canada, there's no room for weapons that were made to kill large number of people. There's a consensus across Canada that we have to do everything we can to protect Canadians and their communities from gun violence. And we have committed to do exactly that. We were almost ready to announce measures to strengthen gun control when the Parliament was suspended because of the pandemic. And we will be making announcements in days to come, and we'll give more details on this then.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. Just to switch topics again, if you will. Were you or anyone in your government aware back in January that China had engaged in a global effort to procure PPEs and have those sent back to China? And if you or anyone in your government knew about this, why didn't you try and stop it?
As of January 2nd, our Chief Public Health Officer convened a group of provincial public health officers to advise that there were reports of a new virus present in China. Our intelligence services were tracking and aware of the issues, and we got regular updates through the month of January. Further than that, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello again. I'm Peter Van Dusen.
Okay, that is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking mainly on the helicopter crash off the coast of Greece, confirming that 6 people were on board, one identified as Abbigail Cowbrough, and the other 5 have still not been identified publicly. Here's a quick recap of what the Prime Minister announced today. You can find full details on globalnews.ca. We heard from him again about that. We also heard questions about PPE and when we knew, that was the last question we heard, when China had engaged in a global effort to secure PPEs. That's the story we're working on Global National. That was a Global News reporter that asked that question. We also now know that the fleet of Cyclones, that is the chopper that went down, and again, it was part of a training exercise. That fleet of Cyclones is on pause. It has not been grounded. We do not know the cause of that crash, but we do know that the flight recorder has been discovered. More information on globalnews.ca. Thanks for staying with us. We'll be right back.
Greece, where Canadians were serving as part of NATO Operation Reassurance. Let me say to the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces, your colleagues were heroes who fell in the line of duty, protecting Canadians, protecting Canada, protecting our allies, and protecting freedom. My heart goes out to their families, to their loved ones, to their friends, and to fellow members of the Canadian Armed Forces. All of Canada is with you in your grief.
Allow me first to express my deep sorrow with respect to the events that took place off the coast of Greece, where there were Canadians taking part in Operation Reassurance. I would like to say to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces that your crew members were heroes who lost their life in the line of duty protecting Canada. I am wholeheartedly with their family and their friends and their crew members in the Canadian Armed Forces. Our thoughts go out to all of you, as do the thoughts of all of Canadians.
We'll hear from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, the Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Howard New, the Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller, and the President of the Treasury Board,
Mr. Jean-Yves Duclos.
So is Indigenous Service Canada's Chief Medical Officer of Public Health, Dr. Tom Wong. He's available to answer questions as well. Dr. Tam, please.
Hello, everyone, and bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone.
As usual, I'll start with the latest numbers on the COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 52,057 confirmed cases, including the first case in Nunavut. There are now 3,082 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 800,000 people for COVID-19, with about 7% of these testing positive. This week, things have been a little flat. COVID curve flat, that is. And that's got us all quite excited about what that means for getting out of our houses. Though, as I have said before, we have to be very cautious going down the other side of the epidemic curve. It would be a whole lot easier if this was a well-trodden path, with many who have gone before us. But we are largely new explorers, so we'll need to curb our enthusiasm and tighten the safety ropes for the way down. Already on this path, we've seen some worrisome transmission events emerging. Having learned a lesson about vulnerabilities in long-term care homes, we're now tackling introductions and spread in certain work settings and congregate housing. I am also concerned about increasing numbers of COVID-19 in First Nations communities in several provinces. We must get ahead of things to protect and support these communities, ramping up testing and contact tracing to find where chains of transmission are occurring. And while we make our way down the mountain together, I remain encouraged by the patience, cooperation, and kindness of Canadians who are making the path easier wherever they are needed. To raise our spirits and keep us going, I'd like to share a couple of the many inspiring examples of Canadians who are joining the call for volunteers. Some are helping to get needed supplies to the front lines, while others are joining the front lines themselves, where possible, to help those in need. Many of these efforts have started as grassroots initiatives by everyday Canadians using their skills, creativity, ingenuity, and generosity to help in any way they can. A great example is Conquer COVID, that began like the little engine that could in one family's home in Markham, Ontario, until it picked up steam from two of Canada's big names, Olympian and hockey legend Hayley Wickenheiser and actor Ryan Reynolds. They joined forces with Conquer COVID out of a shared goal to provide PPE for our healthcare workers. Another Olympian, Joannie Rochette, have just received her medical degree last week, is now heading straight to work to help in long-term care homes in Quebec as they bear the brunt of this epidemic. These Canadians exemplify what it takes to get down this mountain, the precision and grit of an Olympian with a can-do attitude and a readiness to help others. To all Canadians who are helping in innumerable ways, thank you. Merci.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tam. Et maintenant, je donne la parole.
Now I give the floor to Mr. Howard New. Thank you, and good afternoon. As usual, I will start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 52,057 confirmed cases, including the first case in Nunavut. There are also 3,082 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 800,000 people for COVID-19, with about 7% of these testing positive. This week, things have been a little flat, just like the COVID-19 curve. And that's got us all quite excited about what this means for getting out of our houses. Though, as I've already said before, we have to be very cautious going down the side of the epidemic curve. It would be a whole lot easier if this was a well-trodden path, with many who have gone before us. But we are largely new explorers, so we'll need to curb our enthusiasm and tighten the safety ropes for the way down. Already on this path, we've seen worrisome transmission events emerging. Having learned a lesson about vulnerabilities in long-term care homes, We're now tackling introductions and spread in certain work settings and congregate housing. I'm also concerned about increasing numbers of COVID-19 in First Nations communities in several provinces. We must get ahead of things to protect and support these communities, ramp up testing and contact tracing to find where chains of transmission are occurring. And while we make our own way down this mountain together, I remain encouraged by the patience, cooperation, and kindness of Canadians who are making the path easier whenever they are needed. To raise our spirits and keep us going, I'd like to share a couple of the many inspiring examples of Canadians who are joining the call for volunteers. Some are helping to get needed supplies to the front lines, while others are joining the front lines themselves where possible to help those in need. Many of these efforts have started as grassroots initiatives by everyday Canadians using their skills, creativity, ingenuity, and generosity to help in any way they can. A great example is Conquer COVID, that began like the little engine that could in one family's home in Markham, Ontario, until it picked up steam from two of Canada's big names. Olympian and hockey legend Hayley Wickenheiser and actor Ryan Reynolds joined forces with Conquer COVID out of a shared goal to provide PPE for our healthcare workers. Another Olympian, Joni Rochette, having just received her medical degree last week, is now heading straight to work to help in long-term care homes in Quebec as they bear the brunt of this epidemic. These Canadians exemplify what it takes to get down this mountain. The precision and the grit of an Olympian with a can-do attitude and a readiness to help others. To all the Canadians who are helping in innumerable ways, we thank you.
Okay. Merci, Dr. Knu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knu.
From our Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller. Mark, please.
Kwe Tanse Ulukut Sego. Good afternoon. Bonjour.
Good afternoon.
As of April 29th, there have been 129 COVID-19 cases in First Nation communities on reserve and 16 confirmed cases in Nunavut's Inuit communities. As stated by Drs. Tam and New, this morning brings confirmation of the first COVID-19 case in Pond Inlet, Nunavut. With the community and the territorial government, we will be giving this our full attention to ensure appropriate contact tracing and maximum containment efforts are undertaken. To date, over $690 million in funding has been directly allocated by Indigenous services towards the health response to COVID-19. This includes activities undertaken directly by the department, such as procurement of supplies and nursing services, as well as the preparedness measures being undertaken by communities. Services aux Autochtones Canada.
Indigenous Services Canada continues and will continue to keep individual safety equipment for First Nations and supplies. This is for healthcare professionals who are taking care of patients sick with COVID-19. To date, we have sent several orders of PPE and surgical masks across the country. We want to support them during this pandemic, and we continue to rapidly respond to demand within 24 hours.
The pandemic is impacting Indigenous communities in many ways. Whether there are cases or not, or close to their communities, people find themselves experiencing distress, anxiety, and uncertainty. This is particularly the case for people who are at higher risk or the family members of those who are at high risk. These are real and understandable reactions, and there are mental wellness supports available to help. It's important to underscore that many communities and service providers are adapting their operations to respect the requirement for physical distancing, and they should continue to do so. For example, in our case, we have increased the number of crisis intervention counselors on shift at the Hope for Wellness helpline, which is now receiving more than 100 calls and chats a week linked to COVID-19. The Hope for Wellness helpline is available to provide immediate, culturally safe telephone crisis intervention support for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the number is 1-855-242-3310. The online chat is hopeforwellness.ca in English and in French, and upon request in Cree, Ojibwe, and Inuktitut. Le financement a été versé.
The funding was paid to the Indigenous Community Fund, including $15 million for urban populations. As previously announced, additional funding was also sent to support shelters that offer essential support to women and children that are fleeing violence on the reserves. We've announced support for Indigenous communities and for post-secondary students. I would like to say that more support will be necessary, and we will continue to work with communities at every step of the process to ensure that we meet their needs.
It should come as no surprise to anyone who knows someone that has worn the uniform that today our nation grieves, and in the face of uncertainty, the members of the Canadian Armed Forces are stepping up to help those most in need. These are people that are prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for Canada, and that is just a small window into the character of these people. Across the country, we have seen Rangers and Canadian Armed Forces members stand up and step up where Canadians need it most. In our long-term care facilities, in areas with acute resource needs, and in remote areas of the country. They've done this unfailingly and with a level of grace and professionalism that we've come to expect from the Canadian Armed Forces. And today they do so, most certainly, with heavy hearts.
We understand that seniors in long-term care homes are particularly vulnerable to this virus, and their health and safety are our utmost priority. We are deeply concerned by the spread of this virus across the country, and we recognize the tragic events that took place in Quebec long-term care homes. That is why we've provided support to these institutions that are affected by COVID-19, thanks to the use of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Red Cross, and Health Canada volunteers. Resources have been mobilized to help Quebec get through this tough time. We always do this when an emergency situation threatens our citizens. The Canadian Armed Forces do everything they can to help those who are in need. To date, roughly 500 medical personnel and CAF support members have been deployed in long-term care homes in Quebec. This will help doctors and nurses locally to ensure that they can manage patients and provide health care to those who are in long-term care facilities. We will also help with the coordination of nursing and logistics need and provide individual protection for those who work in long-term care homes. Moreover, roughly 160 Canadian Rangers employed in Basse-Côte-Nord and Nunavik will provide general and logistical support locally by creating mobile clinics and by guiding the local population.
To work in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and as provinces, territories, and cities start discussing the eventual easing of restrictions, we will continue to be extremely vigilant. By working together, we're flattening the curve. And we'll continue this together with work in all communities, secure in the knowledge that we will all keep our fellow citizens safe. By working together, we're saving lives. Miigwech, Nakumik, thank you, merci.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Now, I give the floor to the President of the Treasury Board, Mr. Duclos. Thank you, Christia. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to also say that our hearts go out to the families and friends of the victims of the terrible crash of the helicopter that took place in the Mediterranean Sea. And like the Deputy Prime Minister said, our thoughts are with you during this very difficult and painful time. Talking about commitment at the Canadian Armed Forces, I would like to quickly talk about the deployment and the work of the CHF in long-term care homes in Quebec, where there's also a tragic situation that affects thousands of vulnerable seniors. And 125 medical technicians were deployed in 5 care homes after the request that the Quebec government made on April 23rd. In recent days, we have seen the deployment of 320 other members of the Canadian Armed Forces in 8 long-term traditional care homes, a total of nearly 500 members in total, and roughly 550 soon. We also expect the deployment of many Canadian Armed Forces in 7 other long-term care homes in Quebec, and this will give us the opportunity to thank the members of the CAF and also the members of various institutions and long-term care homes for their very strong work that is highly appreciated. And we also like to thank the representatives and the officials of all levels of government that allow us to cooperate together to provide services and to support seniors who so need this care. Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Yves. We're now ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. So as usual, we'll start on the phone with 3 questions, 1 question, 1 follow-up. Opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. The first question is from Emily Bergeron from Agence QMI. La première question de Emily Bergeron de l'agence QMI. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Oui, bonjour. Hello. My question is for Mr. Duclos. It is about the assistance provided by the Canadian Armed Forces and long-term care homes. You've said that there will be care provided to 8 new care homes. Can we get an idea of which long-term care homes you're talking about and how many personnel will be sent per institution and what will be done exactly? Answer. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, there are 5, 8, and 7 numbers. So there are 125 members that were deployed, 8 additional long-term care homes that received members for a total of between 550 members that will be deployed very soon in these care homes. There are some members that are already there, and we expect the deployment to be completed by May 11th. Roughly, there are nurses that are there, medical technicians, and support staff to support the medical personnel. And there's also other support for other tasks that are necessary in long-term care homes. And there are variable needs, and they also are changing. And this is always done under the leadership of the government of Quebec and in cooperation with the Quebec government. In terms of the number of the long-term care homes, this will be this will be communicated very shortly and separately. Follow-up question? Thank you. In terms of these teams of personnel, you've mentioned nurses, medical technicians. How many military personnel have training in medicine versus those who aren't trained, who are just there to serve meals, for example? Answer. In terms of that, that's more technical on the health side, and I will give the floor to Dr. New. However, what I can tell you generally is that there's a key balance between medical responsibilities and support responsibilities to other types of services. We're talking here about taking care of sick people, so we do have to have medical personnel, and they also have to provide meals, do certain personal care activities, clean the material that's being used. They have to take care of the environment and the facilities, take care of the movement and of personnel and make sure they have the necessary equipment for these long-term care homes. So the Canadian Armed Forces are well equipped to do these activities. And we do recognize that what tasks are done depends on the long-term care homes in question. I don't have much to add to what Mr. Duclos has just said. Yes, the Canadian Armed Forces, with their personnel, obviously have the necessary skills. The needs are changing, and we're working in cooperation with the Quebec government and for these long-term care facilities. We have to examine what the needs are, and we will better understand what every person can do. In terms of doctors, there may be skills for them, activities that meet their qualifications, but the situation is evolving, and we'll have more details in coming days.
Thank you, Dr. Operator. Next question, please.
Thank you. The next question is from Ryan Tumulty from National Post. Your line is open. You may proceed with your question.
Yeah, hi there. I'm asking today about the commercial rent subsidy program that the government's announced. Hearing a lot of concerns from businesses that they have to show a 70% reduction in revenue as compared to the 30% reduction in revenue for the wage subsidy. I'm wondering why this 70% threshold was set.
Well, thank you for the question. As we know, and as is important to be reminded of, this is part of a broad package to support the economy and, most importantly, our workers through this very difficult situation. So these measures are emergency measures. They are there to help businesses and workers in their specific circumstances. As is the case with other measures, there are criteria so that we can allocate the resources to those that are most in need. These criteria both take into account the importance of the needs, but the ability of the federal government to be helpful in a manner which is complementary to the work of provinces and territories. Because in this particular context, as you well know, the agreements were necessary and important in order to implement the program, because regulations around rent, regulations around the operation of the relationships between owners and renters, that's all guided and enforced by provinces and territories. So that's why those rules were designed with provinces and territories and will be implemented in collaboration and in support to provinces and territories. Follow up.
Yeah, so are you saying that there was resistance when you were negotiating with the provinces of setting the revenue drop at the same level as the wage subsidy? And I guess also as part of the program, commercial landlords have to have a mortgage outstanding to qualify for the program. I'm wondering about why that provision is part of the package.
So briefly, two things. First, indeed, we came to a quick agreement with provinces and territories on the best way to join forces and implement support to businesses, and small businesses in particular, in the context of the very severe pressures that they are facing in the crisis. And second, that ongoing work will require the collaboration of the banking sector because it's been identified as key in support to owners and renters, and that's why those specific parameters were specified in both the agreement and the announcement.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Lina Dib de la Presse canadienne. Votre ligne est ouverte. Vous pouvez poser votre question.
Oui, merci. Question. Good afternoon, Mr. Duclos. I'd like to talk to you about the CERB. Your government reached an agreement with the opposition yesterday to do certain things for students and make some adjustments. Will there be a delay in the implementation of the CERB for students? Answer. Thank you for reminding everyone that we were able to work effectively with the opposition parties yesterday. What we saw yesterday was that all parties realized the importance of helping our students. I was a teacher for many years, and I was also a student myself before that, and I know how an economic crisis can have very serious effects on students, not only during the time when they study, because often they'll wonder if it's worth continuing their studies, which is a serious situation for them and also for our society as a whole, but also when they get out of their studies, when they want to take on a job, the economic crisis could have a negative impact on them, even in the very longer term. So yesterday's results were very important. The Senate, if I understand correctly, will soon ratify this legislation, and this will bring us to the next step. We're all aware that the next step will happen quickly, namely the implementation of the system that will allow students to receive the CERB, and we've seen how much we can count on the skills and commitments of the public servants in Canada to rapidly implement this program for students. And there are 7 million recipients of the CERB, and many Canadians that were skeptical about our ability to offer such a sizable assistance program so quickly, well, they've now seen that we're able to do this. A follow-up, Mr. Duclos. My question was about the regulations that you'll have to adjust. Will that delay the implementation of the CERB? And do you have a figure about the number of requests for wage subsidies from companies? And do you see this as an indication that people are turning away from the CERB and asking for the wage subsidy? Well, you've asked a lot of very good questions. It's hard to answer all the questions that are asked. In terms of the regulations, the new specifications that were made yesterday will allow us to rapidly incorporate regulations to implement the CERB for students. And in terms of your question, repeat it once again, please. Could you repeat your question, please? You had 3 other questions, I think. They were all connected to each other. Yes, the number of companies asking for the wage subsidy, unfortunately, I can't give you an answer about that. I think it was about 60,000 yesterday, if I remember correctly. But we expect this number to continue to rise because there's a great need for the wage subsidy. And as you know, we have to ensure that companies can continue to pay their workers so that workers can continue to be available for the economy when it starts up again. Thank you very much, Minister. We'll take a question from the room.
Guess we'll start with Ashley from CBC.
It's actually Annie Bergeron-Oliver from CTV. That's okay, though. We're both blonde. My first question is to Dr. Tam. Yesterday, the City of Ottawa told families to stop visiting their loved ones through the windows at the 4 city-run seniors' homes. I'm wondering if this directive is taking physical distancing measures too far, or if this is something you support.
Well, I know that the Medical Office of Health in Ottawa is very much engaged with her community, so I don't know the specifics of this setup, but I think that question is best left to her. But of course, I certainly recognize how difficult it is for families not to be able to see their loved ones in these in the long-term care homes. So I think our collective advice is to just do that safely.
Okay, and second question. A second Canadian healthcare worker, a PSW from Peel, has died as a direct result of COVID-19. Her union says that too many frontline workers, especially PSWs, do not have adequate access to protective equipment, and they don't have the necessary protections in place to keep them safe. What do you say to workers who feel that governments at various different levels are not protecting them adequately? And are you aware of any provinces or municipalities who are facing any direct shortages right now of PPE?
Well, I know that our teams are working, every day to look and forecast any needs from the different provinces and territories, so that PPE can be allocated. I think I can't comment on the specific distribution down to the front line, but I know that for sure all chief medical officers and their recommendations that we have to protect our frontline workers and the personal support workers at the long-term care homes. We provided some guidance to that effect as well, which includes the protection in terms of masks, for example, for the whole shift or the whole time that someone is working in those settings.
Good morning, Tonda McCharles, Toronto Star. Dr. Tam, can you talk a bit? There's some anecdotal evidence in the U.S. about some positive results coming out of their trials with convalescent plasma, and I'd like to hear you talk about what your opinion is of that, their early results, and how long away do you see actually convalescent plasma actually being in use as a potential treatment here?
Well, I think there are many treatments currently in trial, and convalescent plasma is one. And I know that there are efforts underway in Canada doing that research, whether it's involving the Canadian Blood Service and Quebec. I know that there are efforts underway. And so they have to be done in the context of well laid out studies, of course. So I know that they're underway. I cannot tell you exactly when they'll be completed, but I think we'll keep people informed.
And Minister Miller, can you talk about the case in Nunavut that you mentioned today? So how did that get into that community? How is it that the virus was arrived there? There's so much of a closure around Nunavut. It's hard to understand on a week when you seem to be giving us good news that that's such a terrible piece of news to hear.
No, thank you, Tonda. We are currently, since it is very much a recent development, we're in the initial stages of tracking and making sure that all the measures are taken to stamp out it. The communities have been doing, at least those that have had a relatively low number in remote communities in particular, have instituted pretty strict guidelines to arrest and stamp out as they come in, and with very, very positive results. So, as a number of our public health officers have said, this is a disease that knows no borders, although there are measures that can be aggressively taken to stamp it out and arrest it when it comes in. I would, again, since it is so new, I'll let Tom speak to the specifics of it to the extent we can disclose it. But again, it is so relatively new, and we're just gathering the information and make sure there's aggressive tracking in place to contact anyone that's been in contact with this positive case. So we'll get that information to you as soon as it can be disclosed, but Tom will speak in more detail to it.
Working together with the Public Health Agency of Canada, we support the Nunavut Health Department. Nunavut Health Department is the lead department in order to identify the source of this infection and investigate contacts. Should that be needed, we will assist Nunavut Health Department in both contact tracing as well as epidemiological support, as well as public health measures.
Mike? Good evening, or good afternoon. Mr. Duclos, businesses have told us about this new commercial rental help stuff, that the program isn't working because either they're not eligible or they're unsure that their landlords will support them, or they're not being communicated properly. And we talked to a guy in BC who's got a furniture store, and he's burning through his rental savings to keep going. This is questions from him, and he wants to know, why wasn't this whole thing legislated to be mandatory?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I would signal that this is not only something very important that we're trying to do, but also something very collaborative. As we know, the relationship between landlords and renters is mostly guided by provincial jurisdiction and provincial responsibility. And that's why it was very important from the start to do this in collaboration with provinces and territories, to find the best way, the most efficient way, the most rapid way to channel that help, in particular to smaller businesses. So those businesses are going through very difficult times, although the wage subsidies are going to help them in many cases, although the emergency loans, the 40,000 loans, also will be helpful to them in many cases. We understand that there are fixed costs, and many of them are related to rent that cause them a heavy burden. So the arrangements were designed and will be implemented with the collaboration and in many contexts, many ways, with the leadership of provinces and territories. Now, these things, as we've seen over the last weeks, will often evolve. And that's why we keep listening to the concerns, to the particular conditions of small businesses, in particular across Canada, while engaging with provinces and territories. We're going to make sure that what has already been announced will be implemented in the fastest possible way. And we also, as I said, we all look forward to continuing not only that work, but that discussion and conversation with small businesses in particular.
And I would just like to echo that. We have a First Minister's call. The Prime Minister has a First Minister's call with all of the premiers and provinces of territories later today. This has become a weekly event. The commercial rent support was discussed last week and the week before. And it is actually, I would say, an example of the incredibly effective collaboration of Team Canada that the federal government, the provinces and territories, and landlords were able so quickly to put this huge support in place. This is 75% off your rent. And I would remind people that it comes on top of a vast wage subsidy program, which these businesses, many of them, should be eligible for, and also on top of the business loan program, which is in place. Taken together, all of these programs are by far the largest economic support action that a Canadian government has undertaken in Canadian history. Now, I totally, Mike, understand the profound anxieties of Canadian businesses and of all Canadians. This is a really, really difficult time. And as Jean-Yves said, we are very thoughtful about putting programs in place as fast as we can and being open to figuring out how they are working as we go along. But for you and for Canadians, I would just like people to step back a little bit and also see the magnitude of what has been put into place with, I would say, all levels of government working together and also landlords playing a role here.
And well, today is rent day. This is the day. We all know it. But so businesses that they're in that non-eligible range, or they're trying to figure it out in the next 24 hours. What can they do, or what should they do to get through till tomorrow?
They should be, and I'm sure they are, in conversation with their landlords. I think landlords are keen to keep their tenants in place, and I would encourage Canadian landlords to also act in a responsible way, in a way which is supporting fellow Canadians, is supporting the economy, and which is preparing all of us for a restart. They should be also in conversation with their banks, and the Canadian banks have been very much a part of the programs that the federal government and provincial governments and territorial governments have put in place at all levels. And of course, they should be in conversation with the government to see which programs they can get support for. I would also say get in touch with your MP's offices. I think 3 of us here are also constituency MPs, and my office definitely devotes a lot of time to working with the businesses in my riding and helping them to figure out what they're eligible for. Jean-Yves, est-ce que tu veux ajouter quelque chose?
Did you want to add anything, Jean-Yves?
I think the first message you delivered, Christia, is very important. I think a conversation with landlords is absolutely essential. If I put myself in the position of a landlord, I would be looking not only at the short-term rent I may be getting, but also as to the long-term possibility of retaining my renters. And we're all together in this particular crisis. We all need to help each other. And I think landlords will want, and I think most of them are already doing that, will want to think carefully about how they will treat their renters in the weeks to come.
Thank you, Minister. We have time for 2 more questions on the phone. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Louis-Samuel Perron de la Presse canadienne. Votre ligne est ouverte. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. First, I work for La Presse. A question for Ms. Freeland. In terms of firearms control, are you going to provide legislation this week with changes to regulations that are official? Answer. Our government, even before the very tragic events that took place a week ago, during our election campaign, made arms control a very important component. We all see that increasing firearms control is essential to protect Canadians. And I am certain that Canadians agree with us. We stated this during our election. We're absolutely, well, this is a measure we support. We're going to do it. The Prime Minister has said on many occasions that he's in favor of this, but in terms of the specific dates, I can't tell you that today, but I'd like to reassure you that this is a measure that we believe very firmly in. It's important for our society, and we have to do this now. It's not an issue that we can wait on. Follow-up question? A question for Minister Duclos. In terms about the $250 billion in debt that could be racked up in 2021, are you concerned about these debt levels? Is there a maximum ceiling that the deficit could reach? Answer. We don't have the means to not take the means to directly deal with the current situation. Obviously, we will know in a few weeks that we'll be in a recession, not just Canada, but other countries as well. This recession, if it turns into a depression, we'll have to act quickly. And Mr. Trudeau and Minister Morneau have also reminded us that we're going to do everything in our power to protect our economic and social situation during this crisis. This will be temporary if the government to do what it should to intervene quickly, to solidify the conditions of workers, and in thousands of cases they have nothing to put on their tables. But we have to provide support to workers in Canada, and we also have to provide support to SMEs rather, So the Canadian government cannot skimp. We know this is an emergency situation. And since it's temporary, and if we want it to be temporary, we have to take the means necessary now. Last question.
Thank you. Merci. La dernière question est de Marie Vastel du Devoir.
Last question from Le Devoir.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon. My question is for Ms. Freeland. Once again, about your election promise to ban military-style assault weapons. When, in terms of the date, when do you plan to act? And do you think it is possible to ban military-style assault weapons in Canada before you have a buyback program in place like you promised to do to accompany this measure? Answer. I would just like to underscore that this is a priority for our government. I think that everyone understands that with the COVID-19 crisis, this has somewhat changed our plan for spring. And it's obvious for all Canadians that with the COVID-19 crisis, our priority has been saving lives in Canada. But even before the election, one of our priorities was to control firearms. We're going to do this. I can't give you a specific date today, but I can assure you that we are going to do this very quickly. I don't think we can wait. It's also a question of Canadian lives, and we do have a mandate from Canadians to act and to take measures, and we're ready to do so, and we're ready to act quickly. I can't give you specific details about programs, but I can assure you that Minister Blair has worked on this file quite a bit, and we're ready and we're going to act quickly. Follow up? Well, you just gave my colleague the same answer, but that wasn't really asking that. I wasn't asking when you're going to take action. I wanted to know, given that if you need a buyback program for this military-style assault weapon, you would need a bill. I don't think that's possible right now, since the House is only sitting exceptionally for COVID-19. So if you want to ban military-style assault rifles, how can you do this if you don't have a buyback program in place? And if you do have one, what are you doing aside from promising to ban weapons? And I don't think you plan to do this quickly because you don't have a buyback program in place. Answer. Thank you for your question. I understand very well your question. And thank you for your understanding of what's at stake here and of the legislative situation. Today, I can't give you specific dates. And I also can't tell you exactly how we're going to do this. It's a good question you've asked, and I can assure you we've given this thought, and today I can only assure you and Canadians that we do have an action plan, and we are going to act very quickly. And I can also tell you that I think that the elections showed that Canadians are in support of this, and we did receive support from a majority of MPs that support these measures.
Sure. So I cannot share details today about the exact timing of our government's plan to act on gun control. What I can say is that our government is firmly committed to acting on gun control. This was one of the key planks in our election campaign, and we received a strong mandate from Canadians to act on gun control. This was our intention, and it is our intention. I'm not going to today be able to give you details on exactly when we will act, nor can I give you details on exactly what steps and the order in which we will take the different necessary measures. But let me just say, this is an absolute priority for our government. It has been for some time. I really believe, and I felt as someone, on knocking on doors during the election campaign, this is something Canadians are ready for and they want, and we are going to deliver very soon.
Thank you. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse.
This ends our press conference for today. Thank you.
Thank you.